We want to introduce you to the BC-14. This is in the same series as the BC-7, BC-14, and BC-24. They all operate identically. The difference is just in the size and the roasting capacity and the power. So we're going to show you a little bit about this model, some of the safety features, and then we're going to do a roast with you. One of the first things you might notice is right below the gas valve, or right above the gas valve, is a stop, never open valve until pilot light comes on. And that's because we have a separate pilot light, as we explained in our BC-7 video, that is turned on from the back when you're getting ready to roast for the day, and it will ignite one burner rather than fill the entire burner room with 16 burners emitting gas until it lights. So that's a safety feature. Another safety feature is the auto emergency stop button. Anytime you're operating the machine, if there is an emergency, you can push that button in. It'll kill the entire power of the machine. Nothing can be controlled again until that knob is turned and pops out, and then you can power it up again. Very rare situations would you need that. If you over roasted and you created a fire in the drum, keep in mind that the oxygen it feeds a fire, so if you can stop the load and smother that fire, that would be good. Some people have tried to open the drum and let their burning coffee into the cooling tray, which is a huge mistake because now you're igniting it into oxygen. Also, always remember to keep a fire extinguisher within hand's reach of all your roasters. That's definitely a requirement. It's mentioned in the manual. Taking you to the back of the unit, you can see the pilot light. It's to be left off when you're not running the machine so that gas cannot go to the igniter needle. And then you only turn it on when you're roasting, and then at the end of the day turn it back off. But you've got to have that on before you start roasting. While I'm in the back here, that's where your drum speed control is. On the 7, 14, and 24, these drum speed controls are controlled by a 3-phase motor that has transformers so that it'll run on single phase. That makes for a much smoother transition with any drum speed control. The BCs are all 220 power, 50-60 hertz, and this one I believe is 560 watts. So it's best to plug it into a 220 line. You can, however, use an optional 110 voltage converter. I would recommend one that's at least 3 times, perhaps 4 times the power of the total wattage, so maybe a 2,000 watt voltage converter if you want to run it off the 110 line. They're very efficient, but all voltage converters, there can be a surge when you turn on the power, so you want to have that extra wattage. So these pretty much operate the same as what we described before, but I'm going to take you through real quick, just a quick step-by-step process of starting it up. Just a few notes on these models. They have 2 exhausts, both 5-inch, one coming off the chaff unit where most of your smoke is going to come off of, the other coming off the cooling tray. We'll try to add a picture into that. And they both need exhausted out. You could exhaust them together if you use a backdraft damper or a blast damper so that none of the smoke rushes back in through the cooling tray when you're doing your roasting. It's always, of course, better if you can run those lines separately out. They're pretty easy to set up. These come with a direct connect chaff unit, but they aren't assembled, so all you got to do is connect the direct connect chaff unit. I apologize for the poor lighting. We're in the warehouse. But this is the manual dial damper, and you'll need to connect that onto the unit with these ferro clamps, and then also the large chaff unit, and then the fan sits on top. That's pretty much all there is to assembling one, and so you can actually be up and running pretty much the day you receive the machine if you got the proper piping to pipe it out of the building. Looking at the control panel, it's very similar to all other BC models. You've got the timer on top. The reset button is the little button that says RST. You've got the two Omron digital controls, one for environmental or hot air temperature, the other for bean temperature. You've got the power button to turn the machine on. The baking button is actually the igniter. You've got the cooling for turning on the fan for the cooling tray. This is for the mixing arms for the cooling tray. And this button is to start and stop the timer. So we go ahead and start the roaster. Since it wasn't reset, we'll reset the timer. Now, as I said before, you want to follow all the safety features. If you're using a natural gas unit, you want to have a certified gas technician texture lined so that it's 70 to 80 BTU for the 70 or 80,000 BTU for the BC-14 and a water column pressure of 7. And you want that all properly installed and tested for leaks, so you don't have any gas leaks. And then you're pretty much ready to go at that point. Remember, as I stated, the back pilot light valve needs to be open before you begin the roast process. So we have our back pilot light valve turned on, and remember, all gas valves turn on counterclockwise, turn off clockwise. So this one you want to make sure is completely off in here in the front. Now what you would do is you would hit your, you got to make sure your fan or your air speed control on the manual dial damper is set to about 3, maybe 3.5. So you get enough air pulling through the burner room. And then you would start your baking button, and you could visually look in through the window to make sure that the pilot light lights. In this case, I'm using a LPG model and I don't have the gas on, so after about 3 or 4 seconds, an emergency alarm goes off and it shuts down the solenoid and stops the operation. So make sure your gas line is turned on and then go ahead and attempt it again. So on this BC-14, I found it's easier to ignite it at about 1 on the airflow. So I'm going to turn that on, and you'll hear it power up. You might see a slight movement in the gas valve. Actually, you may not, because it's only lighting the pilot light, and that doesn't run through there. So now that the gas pilot light is lit up, and I'll show you a picture of that. It's very hard to get a video of this because of the lighting in the warehouse, but you probably can see, I hope, that the pilot light is lit on. Now I'm going to begin turning on the valve over here. And once I turn that valve on, if I can get a visual on this, you should see the other pilot, or all the other burners begin to light. So there they go. I don't know how well you can see them through the video. So now it's beginning to preheat. If you're using an LPG or propane model, you're going to need the high-end Marshall 1912-197 so that you get your gas pressure up. As a typical low pressure regulator will only take it up to maybe about 2. This will allow you to the full reach. Generally speaking, you don't need to go on these past about 3 or 3.5 on the preheat. And as you can see, the unit's heating up really fast. I don't know what we started at, about 80 degrees, but we're on the bean temperature, we're already up to 290. I forgot to turn on the timing to see how long it takes, but generally speaking, depending on ambient temperature, your timing should never be more than 15 minutes. As you can see here in Arizona, where it's 80 or so degrees right now in October, it probably will heat up to my preheat temperature in about 5 minutes. What I like to do is heat it above the preheat temperature. My drop or charge temperature is about 350 on most of my roasts. So I'm going to go ahead and run this up, since it's the first roast, maybe to 400 or a little bit past that. Then cut off the gas and see what the true temperature is inside the drum. Your first roast will never be the same as all the rest, because even though the Omrons try to tell you the best temperature, it's impossible for them to tell you the exact temperature of the metals, which you'll be able to tell after the first roast. Today we're going to roast 5 pounds of Columbia, a real nice Arabica coffee. I don't know exactly which Columbia it is, so I can go ahead and put that in the hopper and get it ready. Keep in mind that on these larger machines, typically speaking, your minimum roast is going to be 1/4, maybe 1/5 of the total roast. So on a BC-14, you're probably looking at minimum roast of about 3 pounds, and then maximum 14. Once these machines get going, because they have, I believe, 16 burners in them, after the first roast, you're going to be able to do up to 5 roasts per hour. They're very powerful machines. So you can see I've let it preheat to 456 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and cut off the baking button. And always remember, turn off your valve here, because when you start it back up, you don't want the gas releasing in all 16 burners. And I'm just going to watch it for a couple minutes. I still have my airflow really low at about 1. You can see, if you see well with the lighting, it's rapidly dropping. So the real temperature of the metals weren't what the air temperature basically was that hit the probes. But we're getting closer to where I like to be, which is in the 350 to 375. I never go higher than 400 on charging a roast. So I'm pretty comfortable with where it's at right now. So I'm going to go ahead and start my timer and go ahead and drop the beans into the drum. And once they're all in there, remember to close the hopper. And I still don't have my gas power back on. So I'm going to go ahead and, some people like to leave it off for 30 seconds or so with the idea that the beans will even out their heating. I'm going to go ahead and power it back on. Remember, my igniter's on. My pilot light needs to be lit. So it's lit, so now I can light up all the others. And I'm not going to turn this up super high, even though it's my first roast, because I've only got 5 pounds in there. I've got it down to about 1.75. I'm just now getting used to the power of the BC-14 myself, so I may over or underestimate this on this roast, but give you a general idea. We got it at 1.75. I've got an airflow of 1. I'm going to look in there. It looks like it's ready to bottom out now at about a minute. Yeah, there we go, at a minute and 25 seconds. It bottomed out at 198.3. So the airflow is about 30 degrees above that. I may bump up the airflow to 2 and see how that goes. I'm leaving it at 1.75 because I want to watch this rate of rise. Keep in mind that the first 5 to 7 minutes you're going to be doing your drying phase, where you're bringing it up to a temperature of about 335 degrees. Then it goes into browning or mallard phase from 335 until you get the first crack. And I think my rate of rise is actually pretty fast. Remember, this is 5 pounds. The machine will really basically about 1/3 what the machine's maximum is. So I may want to bump this back just a little bit. What we don't want to do is get radical and bump it back to where it begins to stall out. So right now we're at 2.5 minutes, 227 degrees on the bean temperature. I think we're going at a pretty good rate of rise, and we'll keep an eye on that for a moment or so. Okay, here we are now at almost 4 minutes. We're at 281 degrees, yet 4 minutes. I've got the airflow set at 2, the KPA's at about 1.7. We seem to have a pretty good rate of rise. We should end our drying phase somewhere around 6 minutes, I'm guessing. Maybe you'll give or take a little bit. I forgot to mention to you what the drum speed is on this. Let me take a peek. Generally speaking, I keep the drum speed on these at about 50 or 60% until I go into the browning phase, and maybe when I get closer to first crack, I'll bump it up 10 or 20. Every roaster's different. For example, the Phoenix models, you got to turn them much higher because they have less powerful motors. So you may have to turn them to 7 or 8 during the regular roast and then bump them up to a 9 or 10 as you get closer to first crack. So here we are at 5 minutes, 8 seconds, 312 degrees. The timing is pretty much right where we want it. Okay, here we are at 5 minutes, 50 seconds. We're getting to the point where we're ending the drying phase. It's now at 332 degrees. I'm going to take you over in a minute to look at the front. We're going to kind of focus on that so you can see the browning phase, and then as we go into the roasting phase. I apologize if you can't see very well. My camera is overheating. I had dropped it a couple months back, and now when I do video for any length of time, it starts to overheat. But we're getting into a nice brown. We're doing a second roast on this test because my poor Canon camera overheated after being dropped a couple months ago, and I wasn't able to show you the end result when we did the testing of the sample testing, as well as pouring it into the cooling tray. I did take a quick shot with the cell phone, but I don't think it's so great. So I'm going to take up, without overheating my camera again, I'm going to go ahead and take up where I left off when this next roast, which this is going to be Nicaragua, probably about the same amount of coffee, 5 pounds, and I'll just take up where it starts to go into first crack and show you the rest of the video. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the gas for a second, turn off my valve, start my timer, oops, wrong button, start my timer, charge my beans, which I think this time I put a little bit more than 5 pounds, maybe closer to 6 pounds of Nicaragua. And so I'm going to let it go a few seconds, and I'm going to kick on the gas. Because the machine is now thoroughly heated, I'm going to try to start it at a lower kPa, maybe 1.5. See how that goes. I'm going to go ahead and kick it on now. I got this off and kick it on the valve. Now I'm going to kick on the gas. And I'm just going to do it 1.25 for a minute and see how that works out. So the turnaround time will probably be about the same, maybe a little later. Depends on how long I left the heat off, but I think the turnaround temperature is going to be higher than what it was last time, which was, I think, around 193, if I remember right. And then I'm not going to do much more video now because I don't want to overheat it and miss the first crack and the dumping it into the cooling tray. So we're right at 115, well, 1 minute 17 seconds, 250. It's about ready to turn around. There we are. We're at, yeah, there we are. 250.1 at 129. Now it's beginning the rise. So I'm going to turn this off to save my camera, and then I'll be in touch as we go into first crack. So here we now are at almost 7 minutes, just starting to go into first crack on this Nicaragua coffee. It's $3.95. I don't know if you can hear it with all the other sounds. We're only at 1 kPa, about 5.5 pounds, I'm guessing, of coffee. We're going to look now toward the front. Okay, we're going into a rapid first crack. You can probably hear that. I'm actually going to kick off the gas because we're at 413 at 7 minutes 45 seconds. I'm going to up the airflow to about 5 because I noticed a decent amount of chaff in there. and I think it's going to just carry its way through. It's actually a really nice looking roast right now. On this Nicaragua, I do like to take it up a little darker than I currently have it, maybe up to about 430 degrees, which will probably get there at about 9 minutes, even with the gas off. It's still doing a nice rate of ride. It's now at 424 on the bean temperature, 432 on the airflow. The airflow is actually starting to go down a little bit because we're pulling more air through it, slowing down the rate of rise, which I kind of like to do as I develop this. And I really like what I'm seeing now. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to drop the beans. Turning on the cooling, the mixing. And let's see if I got a view for you. Go ahead and drop them. And there we go. About close to 6 pounds of Nicaragua coffee. A nice looking roast, and we'll show you a little better view in a minute. Okay, I'm hand holding the camera, so sorry if it's shaky. I just couldn't get a real good view of the mixing, but here we are with over 5 pounds of coffee in it, and as you can see, it's lots of room to move in that cooling tray, very large cooling tray. So that gives you an idea of the BC-14, and if you need one bigger, we've got the BC-24, which easily does 100 pounds, so maybe even up to 120 pounds of raw coffee roasted per hour.